Welcome to Bloomington Today. I'm Kaylin Cockriel. Thanks for joining us. As promised, we're keeping you updated right here on Bloomington Today about the potential for spring flooding in some areas around the city. Public Works recently sent out letters to residents who live in specific areas that may be impacted by flooding. Properties receiving these caution notices were selected based on their proximity to the potential high water elevation due to snowmelt and rain amounts. The 9-mile creek corridor from Marsh Lake Dam to Old Shakopee Road, Lower Penn Lake, Oxborough Lake, Barthel's Pond, and Palmer Road south of Overlook are all areas of concern right now. We'll keep you updated as temperatures warm and the spring thaw takes full effect. If you'd like more information on some of the resources provided by the city in the event of flooding, visit the city's website. Well, the city of Bloomington would like to extend a big congratulations to a volunteer recently honored for his tremendous contribution to the Bloomington Parks and Recreation Division. Michael Young received the 2011 Daymaker of the Year award given by the Rotary Club of Bloomington. Young was one of 7 finalists recognized for their outstanding levels of service above self throughout Bloomington. Michael worked extensively with the 2010 Summer Spectrum program, where he volunteered more than 120 hours of service. Congratulations, Michael. Thank you for your service to the city of Bloomington. And be sure to tune in to next week's Bloomington Today, where we'll bring Animal Control Officer Bill Forbes back to discuss a few tips for getting your pet geared up for spring. Last time Bill was here, you may remember a special guest by the name of Sharon, a gray short-haired cat found off of 35W. We're happy to announce that Sharon has found a forever home since the last show. Be sure to tune in for another adoption segment, as well as lots of great tips for pet owners who are coming out of winter hibernation with their animals. And as spring draws nearer, it's the perfect time to reflect on our community's past and how we grew as a city. Now let's take a look at the history behind Bloomington, dating all the way back to the Dakota tribes, Gideon Pond family, and world wars, to see just how Bloomington became the 5th largest city in Minnesota.
Land and water, 2 elements that have attracted people to Bloomington for hundreds of years. Before there was a Bloomington, there was Hichahataka, a Dakota word meaning where the water touches the bluffs. This highway of yesterday helped to settle the area and transform it into the community we now call Bloomington. Prior to the houses and highways, there was another civilization that called this land home. Evidence of this prehistoric society still remain. Ancient Indian mounds tucked behind neat rows of houses. These mounds were built roughly 1,200 years ago and still used relatively recently, within the past 300 to 400 years. Their creators, perhaps the ancestors of the Dakota people, or a prehistoric aboriginal tribe. No one knows for sure. What is known is that by the late 16th century, Bloomington was part of the vast Dakota nation. In time, Bloomington would be home to the villages of Chief Pinneshaw on 9 Mile Creek and Chief Cloudman.
The original village site that Cloudman had is right on the edge of the bluff. That was a summer village site. All of the farming took place below the bluff because the land on there was so fertile.
It was Chief Cloudman who would invite a pair of European brothers with water in their name to call this land home. The bluffs overlooking the Minnesota River continued to attract settlers, but now they were Europeans. The first were Peter and Anna Quinn, Irish immigrants appointed by an Indian treaty provision to teach farming to the Dakota. But it was another pair of settlers that would leave a lasting mark on Bloomington. Gideon Pond left his Connecticut home in 1834 and trekked to Minnesota with his brother Samuel to pursue Christian missionary work. They settled near Lake Calhoun, where they developed friendly relations with the Dakota. Later, Gideon established another mission, Oak Grove Mission, about 7 miles up the Minnesota River from Fort Snelling. The church would later be moved by oxen and horses to Old Shakopee Road and Penn Avenue in 1864. The Pond brothers taught the Dakota farming techniques and developed a written form of the Dakota language to translate the Bible and publish a newsletter. In return, the Dakota gave Gideon a special name.
Grandpa was grizzly bear. That was a compliment that it was grizzly bear.
Samuel Pond eventually moved on to Shakopee, but Gideon stayed on, preaching, farming, and serving in the territorial legislature. Part of his legacy to Bloomington is this 2-story brick house high on the river bluff between a pair of freshwater springs. Gideon Pond died in 1878. When word of his death reached his old friends, the Dakota, they traveled to the Pond home to pay their respects.
My mother tells me that her grandmother told her that when Gideon died and he was laid out in his coffin here in the house, that some of the Indians came to see him or view the remains, and supposedly said, "We've lost the best friend we ever had."
When the Dakota left Bloomington in 1852, Europeans began pouring in. Waves of French settled south along 9 Mile Creek. The next wave of immigrants included Irish, Germans, Scandinavians, and Britons. Soon every section was occupied. Also in 1852, the Bloomington Ferry began operations, providing a much-needed crossing on the Minnesota River. Some of these first settlers named the area after their hometown, Bloomington, Illinois. They valued education, so the area's first public school was organized in 1855. 1858 was a banner year. The township of Bloomington was officially organized on May 11th, coinciding with Minnesota's statehood. Less than 3 years later, the business of building a community would have to be postponed. Bloomington's help was needed in the war between the states.
There was that feeling by many that, hey, it was this federal government that made it possible for us to obtain this land at a very low price. I feel an obligation to pay back, to serve the government.
Bloomington soldiers, the Civil War of 44, served in some of the conflict's most famous battles, including Gettysburg. Back in Bloomington, Old Shakopee Road was becoming a sort of town center, especially when a town hall was built at the corner of Penn and Old Shakopee Road in 1892. The intersection was already home to a general store, the Grange Hall, and, not far away, the McAfee grist mill on 9 Mile Creek. Upstream, a bridge across the Minnesota River put the Bloomington Ferry out of business. By the end of the 19th century, Bloomington boasted 1,000 residents, but it was still a farming community at heart. The first signs that this would change were just around the corner. Time didn't stand still, and neither did Bloomington. The railroad period was introduced in 1910 by Colonel Marion William Savage and his gas-electric Dan Patch line. The colorful Savage made his fortune racing horses, so it was no surprise when he named his new railroad after his champion harness racer. Automobiles also rolled into town, even though roads were few and far between. Residents remember purchasing Model Ts from Elmer Scott, the area's first Ford dealer.
Elmer didn't show him how to drive it or anything, so his wife sat by him with his book. And May, his daughter, and I were in the back seat. We took a ride over to the cemetery. She told him what to do with his book.
Bloomington was already starting to gain a reputation as a vacation spot. A favorite destination was the Automobile Club overlooking the Minnesota River. A resort for weekend motorists, the club featured dining rooms, a dance floor, sleeping rooms, and garages. The town even boasted air transportation, landing 3 airports at various times. Better transportation was one reason one-room schoolhouses were no longer needed in every neighborhood. In 1917, 5 rural school districts were consolidated. A year later, bus transportation came on the scene. During the upcoming period of change, which would include a world war and depression, farming remained a stable, reliable way of life in Bloomington.
When the Depression times came along, we never had much trouble because we didn't have much money, but we had plenty of food from the gardens and from our animals. So growing up in Bloomington was really a memorable time in my life.
In 1941, national events would again occupy the time and efforts of Bloomington's residents. After the community lost one of its own at the bombing of Pearl Harbor, many young men left their families to serve in World War II. Back home, residents planted victory gardens and organized a local civilian defense council. Others crossed the Minnesota River every day to work at a shipyard in Savage, building tankers for the Navy. The hulls were floated down the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers to New Orleans, where they were outfitted for ocean-going service. In 1945, the country and Bloomington passed this test, but another test was still to come. At the end of World War II, residents described Bloomington as a quiet, peaceful community with low taxes and little industry, a perfect place to start a family. But the nationwide housing boom was just reaching the town's borders, and one asset in particular attracted home builders.
All those nice flat sand plains out in East Bloomington where you could lay down a grid pattern and put up 3-bedroom ramblers in a few weeks.
1947 proved to be a pivotal year. Zoning and building regulations were enacted, the first full-time town employee was hired, and the Bloomington Volunteer Fire Department was established. 6 years later, the community would change from a township to a village form of government. The small community was growing up. Bloomington's population more than doubled between 1940 and 1950. Schools were already feeling the effects.
My class there were 45 in my graduating class. Time I went back and started teaching in 50, I think the senior class was 65. But there was like a pyramid, like a wedge.
Then the real explosion occurred. Bloomington's population skyrocketed, shooting from less than 10,000 people in 1950 to 52,000 people in 1960.
And I don't think you've had any other community in the state that's had that kind of growth.
Services sprung up to accommodate the community of young families. 16 schools were built between 1953 and 1963. Industries such as Thermo King moved to town. The first parkland was acquired, and Interstates 494 and 35W crossed the community. A youth sports organization was launched after 50 kids showed up for a traveling team tryout.
And right there and then, we had to break it down to 15 kids. That's all we could have for the squad itself. And as I made the cut, I could see various souls we had to cut with tears in their eyes. They had to leave. And I thought to myself, this is what I want.
Everybody Plays was the philosophy of the Bloomington Athletic Association, which grew into the largest volunteer youth sports organization in the country. With Bloomington's rapid growth came challenges. One of the most pressing surfaced in 1958. At the time, homeowners were still relying on private wells and septic tanks for water and sewage. But then the state health department found that 80% of these private wells were contaminated. Within 4 months, citizen groups rallied around getting a public water and sewer program underway.
Bloomington was greatly benefited not only by location, but also by the quality of folks that stepped forward during those early stages.
The village of Bloomington was growing up. Soon, the nation would take notice. In 1961, the burgeoning village of Bloomington became the city of Bloomington. Voters approved the Home Rule Charter on its third attempt. In March 1961, Look magazine and the National Municipal League named Bloomington an All-American City for 1960. This honor recognized the city's installation of a central sewer and water system and other accomplishments. On July 21, 1961, the Minnesota Twins baseball team played their first game at Metropolitan Stadium.
The first televised game of the Minnesota Twins, I remember it as if it was yesterday. The Twins were playing the New York Yankees. And of course the New York Yankees, and people out east would say Bloomington, Minnesota. I bet the cows are grazing in the streets.
The cows may have been grazing in the streets, but sports fans flocked to this venue to watch professional sports. The Twins shared the arena with the Minnesota Vikings football team. The state's other professional sports franchise, the North Stars hockey team, shone bright at nearby Metropolitan Sports Center. Bloomington was the epicenter for professional sports in Minnesota. In the 1960s, Bloomington's population continued to expand, growing to more than 80,000 residents. More schools were constructed to meet the rapidly expanding student population. Bloomington's business community also experienced growth. Companies such as Toro Manufacturing, Donaldson Incorporated, and John Deere were inside the city's borders. When residents wanted to shop, they did it at Ward's Southtown, the first regional shopping center to serve Bloomington. When residents wanted to play, they did it in the city's park system. The city's Parks and Recreation Division began to acquire significant parkland. Land that would house Dewan Golf Course as well as Hague Park were donated by generous Bloomington residents. The growing youth population also needed a place to play. The goal? A playground in every neighborhood.
They built homes, but they had to give us enough acreage to have a playground. But they could only give us half. So we bought the other half, and now we have, at the end of that development, we have a playground. And this happened at many, many parks.
In 1975, Dred Scott Playfield opened. Named after a slave who lived at Fort Snelling during the Civil War, Dred Scott was considered a premier sports facility.
The consul at that time wouldn't go ahead with the development, and I believe it was about 5 years before they gave the okay, and then we developed this beautiful field out there.
Still more park development was in the offing. The Bloomington Ice Garden and picnic shelters at East and West Bush Lake, just to name a few. Bloomington was well on its way to devoting 1/3 of its land to parks and open spaces. City parks became the perfect vehicle for organized community activities such as Summerfest, the Jazz Festival, the Arts in the Park program, and River Rendezvous, the only rendezvous in the country dedicated to education.
With maturity came the development of the fine arts organizations, including the Medalist Concert Band, the Bloomington Symphony Orchestra, the Arts Center and Gallery, the choral groups, and we now have 8 members of the Fine Arts Council.
By the end of the 1970s, Bloomington was a vibrant city that had changed considerably since 1960, but more change was to come. When opportunity knocked on Bloomington's door in the 1980s, the city answered. However, this opportunity came shrouded in clouds. In 1981, both the Twins and the Vikings moved to the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome in Minneapolis. Bloomington's professional sports home field advantage was over. So what would become of the 100-acre site? Here was the silver lining, a proposal so unique that many found it difficult to grasp. The concept? The Mall of America.
I think the general attitude was, what in the world is that going to be?
In the early 1980s, the Port Authority came in and acquired the land so that the city could be in control of redevelopment of the site. A request for proposals was issued. The proposal from 555 was accepted. Through the rest of the 80s, we went through the acrobatics of trying to turn that proposal into reality. And it actually took until the very end of the 80s, 1989, when ground was broken on the Mall of America.
3 years and many millions of dollars later, the Mall of America opened its doors to the public on August 10, 1992. The nation's largest retail and entertainment complex has enjoyed success ever since.
It was handled and implemented by people in Bloomington. We were not given a great deal of help by anybody else. So I think we can take great pride as a community in having put it together and continuing to watch it work very well.
The Mall of America captured the lion's share of attention during the late 80s and early 90s. However, other projects were quietly springing up all over the city. The Trammell Crow Company developed 3 premier office buildings in West Bloomington. Meantime, the microchip industry proved to be more than just a chip off the old block, when Control Data was transformed into companies such as Ceridian, VTC, and Cypress Semiconductor.
So it all came from the implosion of Control Data that resulted in an explosion of a lot of successful companies. And if you would go around and find all of those parts of Control Data and total up the employment and the economic activity in them, they would be far greater than the employment and the sales of the old Control Data at the time that it split up.
At the end of the 1990s, the Bloomington School District brought forth the largest school bond referendum in Minnesota history, $107 million. Voters approved the referendum for much-needed renovations and repairs to district schools. Still, more improvements were to come citywide. The 21st century ushered in a host of building projects around Bloomington. In 2000, city facilities were beginning to show their age. Most had received nips and tucks along the way, but it was time for more than a facelift. Nowhere was that more true than Old Town Hall. Built in 1892, the facility is one of a handful of 19th century structures still standing in the city. The renovation restored the building to its former glory.
The restoration and preservation of the Old Town Hall was extremely important in that it is the only standing artifact and structure remaining at the town center. Town center was at Penn and Old Shakopee. It was the halfway mark between Fort Snelling and Shakopee, known as the 9-mile point. Old Shakopee was an Indian trail and the old Fort Soldiers Trail, and so extremely significant historically.
When Bloomington City Hall was built to replace Old Town Hall in 1964, it was a major improvement over the cramped quarters in the original building. As the years passed, the number of city employees increased. An expansion was added, but 30 years later, the 2-story brick building was bursting at the seams, and it was clear that a new facility was needed. In 2003, the new 44,000-square-foot Bloomington Civic Plaza opened for business. The Bloomington Center for the Arts, part of the new facility, featured a 377-seat theater, a black box theater, 2 art galleries, rehearsal space, and classrooms.
And we can't do this without the support of our community and the city. And that's what makes it all work. Hardworking volunteers, wonderful arts that are at a hugely high level, incredible high level for community arts organizations, all supported by our community, business members, individual, and our city.
Another location Bloomington residents could enjoy the performing arts was the Normandale Lake Bandshell, which opened in 2001. More than 20 performances are now held at the site each year. In 2002, the Sam H. Hobbs Water Treatment Plant received a $17 million renovation. The overhaul allowed the facility to double its water production. Speaking of water, the Bloomington Family Aquatic Center made its debut in 2002. Amenities included water play features, a renovated bathhouse, and zero-depth pool. For nearly 20 years, the city of Bloomington has been billed as a destination location for regional and national visitors. The Mall of America was a major enticement. Put Sweden's best-known retailer in the mix, and you have an appealing combination, and the beginning of the mall's Phase 2. When IKEA opened its doors in 2004, thousands of shoppers stood in the hot summer sun to check out this legendary store. The Mall of America and IKEA provided a powerful boost to Bloomington's hospitality landscape. Bloomington became home to more than 7,000 hotel rooms, more than the downtowns of Minneapolis and St. Paul combined. This distinction solidified the city's position as a hospitality center, and more hotels and attractions are part of the plans for the Mall of America Phase 2.
But I think the addition of Phase 2 is going to be another boost for Bloomington and more development.
6 months after its maiden voyage in Minneapolis, the Hiawatha Light Rail Transit Line rolled into the Mall of America in December 2004.
1, 2, 3.
In response to light rail, 3 stations were constructed in Bloomington. Light rail also spurred an innovative and cutting-edge project, McGuff Development's 50-acre, $600 million Bloomington Central Station. The transit-oriented mixed-use development includes Reflections condominiums and a 1.9-acre park as part of its first phase. Office, hotels, and restaurants are planned for the development's next phases. The project appeals to those looking for a transit-oriented lifestyle once only found in Minneapolis and St. Paul.
And what we're doing at Bloomington Central Station is we're starting to bring more residential uses into Airport South, also additional office uses, more employees in Airport South. And once we have more residents living there, more employees coming there during the day, what that makes possible is more retail and restaurant, entertainment options. So we're really building a new kind of community, an urban community, not a traditional downtown, but a new urban center here in Bloomington.
Even though the city is completely developed, what will Bloomington's landscape look like in 2025? A crystal ball can't predict the future, but a solid strategic plan could help shape the future. In 2006, the City Council began to plan for the city's future. Called Imagine Bloomington 2025, the plan defines the city's strategy for development, redevelopment, city services, infrastructure, and fiscal strength and stability for the next 20 years.
Well, it's great for the community when you start thinking about the community's amenities, its assets, its parks, its residential housing. All those things are the things that probably the residents really, really care about. The commercial is important. It adds stability to the community, but it's that residential element that I think makes it important for everybody that we look into the future.
Bloomington's reputation of being a leader in the Twin Cities is well-deserved. It has good quality of life, low taxes, excellent schools, diverse businesses, a thriving arts community, and caring neighbors. Probably what Bloomington's founding families envisioned for the future. Since the Native Americans settled along the banks of the Minnesota River, Bloomington has transformed from prairie land to farmland, from a sleepy village to a world-class suburb and global player. With all these distinctions, Bloomington remains a place where the water touches the bluffs.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. For more information on city projects, parks, road construction, and events, visit the city's website. That and so much more is online right now at www.ci.bloomington.mn.us. We'll do you even one better. Sign up for eSubscribe and have updates sent directly to your email or cell phone. This is Bloomington Today, a presentation of the City of Bloomington's Communications Division. I'm Kaylin Cockriel. Thanks for joining us.